In the conference room, Vivian Lane tapped her finger lightly on the projection screen. Starting today, Colin Ward will join core management as Director of Strategic Development. Her voice was not loud, but the microphone carried every word clearly into the ears of more than 40 people in the room. I sat in the third row of the long table, gripping the product iteration plan that the technical department had spent a full 6 months building. Before the meeting started, she had personally promised me that today's core topic would be discussing this plan. But the first slide of the PowerPoint was a giant photo of that man. Colin Ward stood beside her in a crisp suit, wearing a carefully rehearsed, perfectly measured smile. 3 months ago, he had only been an assistant in her office. Now he was being parachuted straight into core management, into a position where he had no experience, a position where he could not even distinguish between the company's product lines. Everyone in the technical department turned their eyes toward me, because what Colin was about to control was the allocation of strategic resources. In plain English, from now on, the technical department's annual budget, equipment procurement, and the approval of core projects. Every lifeline would have to pass through his hands. And this man's understanding of technology stopped at knowing how to turn a computer on and off. I stood. Ms. Lane, this item doesn't seem to be on today's agenda. Vivian looked at me. That look was like someone examining a piece of furniture placed in the wrong spot. Furniture that did not know its place. 75% of this company's shares are under my name. She smiled faintly. There was no warmth in the smile. If I temporarily add an agenda item, who exactly do I need to report to? The conference room was silent for a full 2 seconds. Then she turned, slowly sweeping her gaze across the room, her tone casual enough to be talking about the weather. From this moment on, Colin Ward is Director of Strategic Development. Does anyone object? No one spoke. Her gaze finally returned to me. The curve at the corner of her mouth widened slightly, carrying the posture of a victor. Anyone who doesn't accept it can resign. The moment those words landed, it was as if the air in the conference room had been drained dry. My fingers tightened around the plan. The edges of the pages were damp with sweat, wrinkling in my palm. When this company first started, there had only been 3 of us. Me, Vivian, and a rented second-hand server we bought from a used electronics market. 14 years. I built the technical team from zero to the 12-person core structure we had today. Our code supported more than 90% of the company's business lines. And Colin Ward did not even know what Git was. But I did not say any of that. I only met Vivian's gaze, nodded, and said one word clearly. Fine. Then I turned and looked at the rows of seats behind me. The 12 people from the technical department stood up one after another. The sound of chairs being pushed back filled the conference room. Sharp, dense, like some preset mechanical sequence had been activated all at once. Mr. Parker in the last row moved the slowest. He was almost 60, the oldest veteran engineer in the company. He removed his reading glasses, carefully placed them into the case, then stood and patted dust from his knees that did not exist. 12 people stood neatly behind me. I looked back at Vivian. We all resign. Her smile finally froze on her face. The Parker pen in Colin Ward's hand dropped onto the table, bounced twice, then rolled to the floor. No one picked it up. The conference room was so quiet that the hiss of the central air conditioning overhead could be heard clearly, like some enormous pressure slowly leaking out in a way no one could reverse. My fingernails dug deep into my palm, but my face showed no expression. 14 years of effort had been exchanged for one light sentence. Anyone who doesn't accept it can resign. That product iteration plan, condensed from countless nights of hard work, was still in my hand. The page edges had already turned white from being clenched. I placed it on the table, turned, and pushed open the heavy conference room door. In the hallway, my footsteps did not pause at all. Behind me, 12 pairs of leather shoes stepped across the marble floor. The sound so orderly it seemed rehearsed countless times. The receptionist stood from her seat, opened her mouth as if wanting to say something, then silently sat back down. When the elevator doors opened, the sharp sound of high heels came from behind us. Fast, piercing, each step nailed into the polished floor like a spike. Stop. Vivian's voice chased after us from the end of the long hallway. I did not look back. I walked straight into the elevator and pressed the button for B1. The people from the technical department entered one after another. Mr. Parker was the last one in. The elevator overload alarm gave a short beep. He looked at me helplessly. I said, "It's fine. You go first. We'll take the next one." The moment the elevator doors slowly closed, Vivian's face appeared in the gap. Her lips were pressed tightly into a pale line. She probably truly had not expected me to leave. When the car started, my phone began vibrating wildly. Her name lit up and disappeared on the screen. Disappeared and lit up again, stubbornly repeating 4 times. I did not answer. I only flipped the phone face down on the center console. The vibration finally stopped. Outside the car window, the city was slowly cooling. Leaves along the street curled slightly in the evening wind. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly that each knuckle turned white. 14 years ago, Vivian Lane was not yet Ms. Lane. She was my college classmate's younger sister. Newly graduated, carrying an e-commerce startup proposal full of holes. Looking everywhere for partners. No one believed in her overly ambitious dream. At that time, I had already become an architect at a well-known software company. My monthly salary had long passed $20,000. But I read her plan, listened to her speak for 3 hours, and finally decided to resign and build it with her. For the first 2 years, we did not even have an office. We wrote code in the 2-bedroom apartment I rented. She handled business. I handled technology. That second-hand server sat on the balcony. The summer was too hot, and I was afraid it would crash. So I aimed an old standing fan at it. That fan spun through the entire month of July. In the 3rd year, the company miraculously survived and received its first angel investment. In the 5th year, we finally moved into the Class A office tower we had now. In the 8th year, we got married. Many years ago, a friend asked me why I dared tie my entire future and net worth to a startup project. I said, because she's the smartest and most persistent person I've ever met. I trust her. Now, sitting in this car driving away from her world, I remembered that sentence, and my throat moved uncontrollably. The phone vibrated again. This time it was not a call. It was a message from Vivian. Cold and brief. Only 10 words. You think you can still go anywhere after leaving here? I looked at that line on the screen, placed the phone back on the center console, and did not reply. The car drove out of the underground garage. Blinding sunlight rushed in. In the rearview mirror, the office tower grew smaller and smaller. The 27-story glass curtain wall reflected the afternoon light so harshly that my eyes stung. In that building were 14 years of my workstation. The detailed iteration records of every company product version, and lines of code I had modified one by one at 3 in the morning. But none of that was mine. The shares were hers. The company was hers. Even the programs I had written with my own hands did not bear my name. I took only 2 things with me: this commuter car, and the trust of 12 people from the technical department. On the steering wheel, my fingers slowly loosened one by one. The phone screen lit up again. This time it was not Vivian. It was a message from Mr. Parker. Mr. Hayes, there's something I've held back for 3 whole years. Find somewhere to park. I have to tell you in person. Mr. Parker asked me to meet him at an old noodle shop on the south side that had been open for 20 years. When I pushed open the creaking glass door, he was already sitting in the corner booth. A bowl of beef noodles sat in front of him. His chopsticks were neatly placed across the rim. The noodles had already soaked in the soup and gone a little mushy. It was obvious he had not taken a single bite. When he saw me, he immediately stood, somewhat flustered. His knee accidentally knocked against the table leg, and the tea in his cup shook hard. I gestured for him to sit. Mr. Hayes, just call me Nathan. I pulled out the chair across from him and sat. We're not at the company anymore. There's no Mr. Hayes now. Mr. Parker froze for a moment. His eyes were complicated. Only then did he slowly sit back down. He removed his reading glasses, wiped the lenses with his sleeve out of habit, then put them back on. I had seen that movement countless times at the company. Every time he ran into some difficult technical issue or personnel problem that was hard to mention, he would wipe his glasses like that again and again. You said in your message there was something you'd held back for 3 years. I poured him a glass of warm water. What is it? Mr. Parker looked at the glass of water. His throat moved. He picked it up and drank a large mouthful. Then set it down heavily. His fingers rubbed the warm cup walls several times. 3 years ago, before Colin Ward entered the company, he finally began, deliberately lowering his voice until only the two of us could hear. Ms. Lane did something. What? She made me sign something. What document? Mr. Parker did not answer directly. Instead, he reached carefully into the inner pocket of his old jacket and took out a craft paper envelope. He placed it on the table and slowly pushed it toward me with his fingers. At the time, she told me it was just an internal procedure. She said I only needed to sign. I glanced at the contents and felt something was wrong. But she said. He paused there, as if recalling the scene. She said, "My husband already agreed. Why is a technical director like you hesitating?" I picked up the envelope. My fingertips could clearly feel the texture and thickness of the paper inside. "I should have told you back then." Mr. Parker's voice carried a hoarseness and regret that could not be hidden. "But I didn't dare. My wife has always been in poor health and takes medicine all year. I couldn't lose that job. Mr. Hayes. I'm sorry." I opened the envelope and pulled out the document. Standard A4 paper. The company logo at the top. A bright red official seal at the bottom. The contents were not long. Only one thin page. But I read it 3 times. Back and forth. Before finally confirming I had not misunderstood. It was a technical authorization agreement. 3 years ago, Vivian had used the company's name to permanently authorize all underlying architecture code of the cloud access system. Developed through 7 years of work by our team. A third-party company. The authorization period was 10 years. Practically free. And the legal representative of that company was written clearly in 3 words. Colin Ward. I stared at that line. Without realizing it, I crumpled the edge of the page in my hand. The cloud access system was 7 years of work from the technical department. The company's most core and valuable intangible asset. Its underlying architecture code was the foundation of a skyscraper. Only now did I realize that the foundation had been quietly moved away 3 years ago. This building could collapse at any moment. And Vivian had personally placed the key to that foundation into Colin Ward's hands 3 years ago. At that time, Colin had not even entered the company. I set down the document. My fingertips trembled despite my efforts to control them. "Mr. Parker, when you signed this authorization agreement, was anyone else present?" "No." Mr. Parker shook his head. "Just me and Ms. Lane in the office. She told me I had to keep it confidential. She said it was a high-level arrangement at the company's strategic level. And the technical department didn't need to know." "Then why did you keep a copy?" Mr. Parker was silent for a long while. His gaze drifted toward the window. "Because the night I signed it, I didn't sleep at all." He removed his reading glasses and rubbed his sore eyes hard. "The next day, I gathered the courage to go to Ms. Lane and ask her to invalidate the file. She said it had already been archived. And told me not to overthink it and just do my work. But from that day on, every few months, I secretly backed up the full code base. I saved the version records of every key module into my private hard drive." "How much did you back up?" My heartbeat skipped. 3 years. He lifted his head. Those eyes, clouded by age, now carried a stubborn light. "From that day until yesterday, when we left the company. 47 core versions total." "Mr. Hayes, I know you left the company with nothing to fear. But I want to tell you that you are not empty-handed. You still have these." Outside the window, the sky gradually darkened. Warm yellow lights came on in the noodle shop, falling across Mr. Parker's sparse gray hair and wrinkled face. I looked at him and suddenly remembered that winter 3 years ago. The cloud access system had just gone online. Everyone in the technical department stayed in the office for 3 straight nights without sleep. Mr. Parker was the oldest. I told him to go home and rest first. He refused no matter what, rubbing his hands and saying, "This is my child. I have to see it safely born with my own eyes." The child he spoke of was later secretly sold by its mother. And he, this quiet old technician, had endured 3 whole years just to hand this crucial evidence to me today. I took a deep breath, carefully folded the document, placed it back into the envelope, and put it in the pocket close to my body. "Mr. Parker, From now on, don't mention this to anyone. I know. Go home and rest. Keep your phone on. Leave the rest to me. Mr. Parker nodded heavily, stood, and picked up the bowl of noodles that had gone completely cold. He hesitated, then turned to look at me. His lips moved. It seemed like he wanted to say something comforting. But in the end, he only said one sentence. Mr. Hayes, choosing her back then was not your fault. Then he carried that bowl of noodles, slightly hunched, and slowly walked toward the register. I sat alone in the booth, my hand inside my pocket, gripping the edge of that envelope tightly. The paper was thin, but every word inside it burned against my fingertips like a red-hot branding iron. 3 years. Vivian and I had slept in the same bed, and on countless nights, I had listened to her even quiet breathing. I had never doubted any decision she made. Every document she asked me to sign, I signed. When she said it was only a procedure, I believed it was only a procedure. When she said she trusted me, I trusted her without reservation. Yet she had spent 3 whole years silently burying an explosive under the foundation I built with my own hands. Now she had placed the detonator in Colin Ward's hands. I closed my eyes, then opened them sharply. My phone screen lit. A system message popped up from the company group chat. Colin Ward had posted an all-staff announcement. Humble and polished. Thank you very much for Ms. Lane's trust. In my new position, I will do my utmost and work with everyone to lead the company toward an even brighter future. Below it were more than a dozen replies from department heads. Neat and uniform. Congratulations, Mr. Ward. Let's work hard together. I opened the group and glanced at the member list. The 12 technical department avatars had all turned gray. Before leaving the group, not one of them had said a word. I flipped my phone face down on the table again. Then I picked up the napkin Mr. Parker had left behind and turned it to the blank side. I took a pen from my bag and wrote 4 words hard into the paper. Cloud Access System. The pen tip stopped at the final stroke, and black ink spread slightly across the rough paper. 3 years. 47 versions of code backups. A fatal authorization agreement. These things might not be enough, but they were already enough to let me know clearly what I needed to do next. The next morning, I received a call from David Chen. David was the representative of Cloud Access's largest current client. 3 years ago, when we signed the first contract, he specifically invited me to dinner at Golden Banquet. During the meal, he gripped my hand and said, "Mr. Hayes, this system of yours saved our company at least $10 million in operations costs. Every year after that, whenever they renewed, he specifically required me to lead the team personally for deep custom development." On the phone, his voice carried a trace of careful testing. "Mr. Hayes, I heard you left Lane Tech. News travels fast. The tech park is only so big." He paused. Then his tone became serious. "I'm calling mainly to confirm something. Our annual renewal contract expires next month." "I know. But this morning, I received an email from Lane Tech saying future technical service would be handled by someone named Colin Ward." David's voice sank. "Nathan, tell me the truth. Does this person understand technology?" I looked out the window. Downstairs, steam was rising from a breakfast stand. The scent of fried batter in hot oil drifted into the room with the wind. This enormous city had just awakened. But I had been awake for an entire night. "Mr. Chen, your contract is signed with Lane Tech. I can't comment on their internal personnel changes." "Fine." David was silent for 2 seconds, as if making a decision. "Then I'll ask another way. If I don't want to renew with them this year, can you provide an alternative plan?" He said it lightly, but the weight was enormous. The Cloud Access System was the bottom layer core architecture for David's entire supply chain management system. If he needed to replace it, the cost of data migration and employee training would be at least 7 figures. Saying he did not want to renew meant he was using real money to tell me this. He would rather bear that huge loss than work with an outsider named Colin Ward. "Mr. Chen, I need some time." "How long?" "1 week." "Good. I'll wait 1 week." He paused, then added, "Nathan, 3 years ago, when you brought your team and stayed overnight in our server room debugging with us, I said this before, with technology, we recognize people, not companies. Wherever you go. My contract follows. The call ended. I held the phone. And a new message popped up. It was from the new group the technical department had created. The message was from Jake Miller. He was the youngest person on the team. Only 26 this year. He had joined 3 years ago and was the main back-end developer I had personally trained. Nathan. I got 3 calls from headhunters this morning. All were referred by former colleagues from Lane Tech. I told them not to push me yet. Push Nathan first. I only go where Nathan goes. Below it, a dozen replies with the same meaning appeared immediately. One after another. Like dominoes knocked down with precision. My fingers hovered above the phone screen. I typed a few words. Then silently deleted them. In the end, I sent only 3 short words. I know. Then I opened my contacts and found a number I had not dialed in a long time. The note was simple. Only one name. Victor Coleman. I did not have much private contact with him. But every time we dealt with each other, he could analyze the complicated situation I faced in the shortest possible time. He was not a traditional friend. He was more like a business consultant whose role was hard to define. We met 2 years ago at an industry summit. He said he owed me a favor because, during a sharp-tongued panel discussion, I had quietly helped him block an extremely tricky question. The phone rang 3 times before it connected. Nathan Hayes. His voice carried just the right amount of surprise. You actually called me first. Are you free? I want to ask you something. Corporate law. He did not sound surprised at all. How did you know? Please. News that you walked out of Lane Tech with the entire technical department spread through every executive group in the tech park last night. I even thought of the headline for you. Technical partner leaves empty-handed. 12 apostles follow. His tone was as calm as ever. Coffee or tea? Either. Same place. 3 o'clock. After hanging up, I opened my computer and pulled up the scanned authorization agreement Mr. Parker had given me. I read it word by word again from start to finish. The terms were extremely tight. Clearly drafted by a professional lawyer. The authorization period for the underlying architecture code of the cloud access system was 10 years. The authorization scope included copying, modifying, distributing, commercial use, and every possible commercial action. At the end of Clause 3, there was a line in even smaller font. This authorization is irrevocable. That meant even if Vivian suddenly developed a conscience and wanted to reverse it, she could not take it back. The signing date was November 17th. 3 years ago. I stared at that date for a very, very long time. November 17th. I slowly closed my eyes and leaned back in the chair. That day had been my 5th wedding anniversary with Vivian. I remembered clearly. That night, she said the company had an important business dinner and that she would be home very late. At home, I made an entire table of her favorite dishes. I waited from 7 to 9. When the food got cold, I reheated it. It got hot. Then cold again. By the time she came home, it was almost 11. Her heels were kicked carelessly near the entryway. She only said, "I'm exhausted," and went straight into the bathroom. I silently cleaned up that entire untouched table of food by myself. Then I placed the anniversary cake I had ordered in advance into the refrigerator. Unopened. The next morning, while fixing her collar, she told me she had signed a very important contract the previous night. She said the company would develop better in the future. At the time, I smiled and said good. Even reached out to straighten her slightly messy collar. So that was what she signed that day. She had signed away 7 years of work from me and the entire team. Free of charge. Permanently. Irrevocably. To her male assistant. At the time, that man named Colin Ward was not even an assistant yet. He was merely a shadow in her office I had never noticed. An intern whose name I had thought I did not even need to remember. My fingers tightened gradually on the mouse. The date on the screen, November 17th 3 years ago, sat motionless. Like a nail driven into time. Cold. Hard. Sharp. I closed the document. Stood. And washed my face. Cold water hit my skin and instantly made me clear-headed. The man in the mirror had eyes a little too red to hide. But there were no tears. From beginning to end, I had not shed a single tear. It was as if my body instinctively knew crying was the most useless thing in the world. After gathering myself, I called someone else. A long-term hardware channel partner of the technical department. Susan Miller. Her number had been stored in my phone for 7 years. Outside work. We almost never discussed anything personal. But I knew one thing. She knew the third-party supplier circle related to the cloud access system very well. So well that she understood the internal structure and equity penetration of every related company. Susan. Help me check a company. Which one? I gave her the full legal name of Colin Ward's company. A few crisp keyboard taps came from the other end. Then several seconds of silence. Nathan. Her voice suddenly became very soft, carrying a trace of almost undetectable sympathy. Do you know who the largest controlling shareholder of this company is? It isn't Colin Ward. 51% of the shares are held by an investment company called V Creation Holdings. And who is the legal representative of V Creation Holdings? Susan was silent for 1 second. Then she said clearly, Vivian Lane. At 3 in the afternoon. I sat across from Victor Coleman. He was a little heavier than when I last saw him 2 years ago. The buttons of his custom suit pulled slightly tight. But his eyes were exactly the same as before, like a cat sunbathing in afternoon light. Half-lidded. Yet seeing everything around it clearly. He placed my phone. Still lit. On the coffee table. On the screen was Susan's message. V Creation Holdings. Victor lifted his coffee and took a slow sip. Your ex-wife hid that deep. It wasn't really hidden. My voice was dry. Corporate ownership structures are public. Under normal circumstances, no one would think to check these things. No. You wouldn't think to check. He set down the cup. Eyes sharpening. No one actively investigates the person sleeping beside them. Do you know what this means legally? I looked at him and said nothing. This authorization agreement for cloud access is essentially a carefully designed left-hand to right-hand transfer. Victor raised 2 fingers and analyzed it clearly. Vivian Lane. In the name of Lane Tech. Authorized the most core technical code free of charge to Colin Ward's company. And the absolute controlling party behind Colin Ward's company is her personal V Creation Holdings. After going around in this circle, the actual usage rights and future commercial profits of the code flowed out of Lane Tech, the platform company, and into her personal pocket. And Lane Tech's other shareholders likely knew nothing. Is that illegal? It depends on the specifics. He leaned forward slightly and lowered his voice. If this authorization fee was far below fair market value or, as you said, essentially zero, then she may be suspected of embezzlement of company assets and illegal misappropriation of corporate property. Lane Tech's other shareholders can absolutely sue her and demand legal responsibility. What if the authorization agreement doesn't mention authorization fees at all? Victor raised a brow. Picked up my phone. Reread the equity information. Then slowly set it down. Then it was a gift. He said each word clearly. A core technical asset worth at least tens of millions was handed for free to her own private company. Sunlight slanted in from the window and reflected a small, harsh spot of light along the edge of the coffee cup. My shadow stretched long across the wooden tabletop. Unmoving. Nathan. Victor leaned back. His fingers tapping gently on the leather armrest with soft thuds. Do you hold equity in Lane Tech? I mean legally. On the corporate registration. No. Nominally. I was the technical partner. But my name was never on the shareholder registry. Back then she said the company had just started. Equity changes were too complicated and cost money. So I didn't bring it up again. Victor was silent for 2 seconds. A trace of pity appeared in his eyes. Then in the legal sense. You were just a senior employee with a high title. Your departure is an ordinary employee resignation. The 12 people you took are the same. I know. But there's one thing where you are absolutely in the right. He extended one finger and tapped the table. The authorization agreement Mr. Parker gave you. If that agreement truly caused serious loss of company assets, then as an informed person and the technical signatory at the time, Mr. Parker had a legal duty to disclose it to the board or all shareholders. If he chose to conceal it, once the matter is exposed, he could potentially bear joint responsibility. My fingers tightened unconsciously on my knee. So I need to expose this completely before he gets dragged in. Exactly. Victor's gaze locked onto mine. But this takes time. And it takes strategy. You need more supporting evidence to prove that the authorization agreement caused substantial damage to the company. Mr. Parker's testimony alone isn't enough. I nodded. I understand. Also. Victor's voice dropped lower, carrying warning. The equity information you obtained from Susan is public information. It can be used. But if you want to further investigate V Creation Holdings bank transactions or contract details, you must use lawful channels. Do not act recklessly. If you give them a handle, you go from plaintiff to defendant. I know where the line is. When I left Victor's office, the sky outside had already darkened. The cold late autumn wind rolled dead leaves across the street. Standing on the steps outside the office building, I zipped my jacket to the top and checked my phone. There were several new messages in the technical department group. Jake had sent a photo he took casually of the old company building. The 27-story glass tower glowing faint gold under the sunset. No caption. But everyone knew what he was looking at. I scrolled through my contacts and found a name. Jason Powell. He was the only person at Lane Tech outside the technical department with whom I had a decent personal relationship. He handled business development in the marketing department and had worked there 6 years, holding a large amount of client resources. When Colin Ward parachuted into power, the marketing department was also one of the most heavily affected departments. I heard that on his first day as the new director, Colin announced that every client contract would be reviewed again. The phone rang 7 or 8 times before it was answered. Nathan. Jason's voice was low. In the background, keyboards clattered and people spoke in the distance. Though I could not make out what they were saying. He seemed to be finding a corner in the office. Can you talk? Wait. A few seconds later, a door closed on his end, and the background noise instantly disappeared. Okay. I'm in the stairwell now. How are things on your side? Jason was silent for a moment. Chaotic. After your entire technical department left yesterday, Ms. Lane called every department head into her office for individual talks. When it came to me, she asked me a strange question. What question? She asked whether, if you started over outside, I would follow you. I frowned slightly. What did you say? I said every marketing contract was being followed by me. Clients recognize my face. Wherever I go, clients naturally go. His tone carried a trace of self-mockery. Then she said that, in that case, she needed me to sign a new non-compete agreement. For 5 years. I can't join any company in the same industry. Did you sign? Not yet. She gave me 3 days to think. Jason paused. But Nathan. This afternoon I went to HR and checked the files. I found something interesting. The entire company, except for the technical department, has been required to sign similar non-compete agreements during onboarding or renewal since last year. Only your technical department never signed a single one. My fingers paused on the edge of the phone. Not one. Not one. Jason repeated. I specifically asked an HR friend to secretly check. 12 people in the technical department. Clean files. No restrictive clauses at all. I leaned against the cold wall, quickly integrating this new information. Vivian had started planning 3 years ago, transferring the core code of the cloud access system into her private company. But she never imposed non-competes on the technical department. She did not need to, because in her eyes, when the technical department left the company, they had nothing. The code belonged to the company. The patents belonged to the company. All they carried was experience inside their heads. Experience could not be quantified as an asset, nor protected by law. But she miscalculated one thing. Mr. Parker's hard drive. Jason. Did your contract with the company include confidentiality clauses about business secrets and internal documents? Yes. Standard confidentiality agreement. But it only covers internal company documents accessed during employment. He answered quickly, clearly having already studied the clauses. But I haven't resigned yet. I'm still a Lane Tech employee. Help me with something. Say it. Check all email records between marketing and David Chen's company. I lowered my voice. Look from last week to today. See whether anyone sent documents or discussions related to cloud access system renewal. Especially from Colin Ward. Fine. But I can't access email. That thing has permission control. You don't need to access email. You only need to contact someone named David Chen. His company side should have received records. Call their business contact in your role as marketing's liaison and confirm renewal progress. Who is David Chen's contact? Wendy Ross. Talk to Wendy. Don't expose anything. Treat it as normal business process confirmation. You only need to get from her mouth whether she received any renewal change documents from Colin Ward or other Lane Tech departments. The other end was silent for a few seconds. Then Jason's voice returned with a faint excitement. Like a string stretched tight for too long had finally been plucked. Nathan. You want to confirm whether Colin has already started contacting clients in the name of Cloud Access? Yes. If he has, that means Vivian has already transferred actual control of Cloud Access to Colin. Not merely granted written authorization. That is a piece of the evidence chain that can be nailed down. Understood. I'll call first thing tomorrow morning. After hanging up, I stood on the steps for a while. The cold wind whipped my pant legs. A new message popped up. From David Chen. Nathan. This afternoon I received a formal letter from Lane Tech saying the technical service contact will change and that I need to sign a supplemental agreement. The letterhead is Colin Ward's. I didn't touch it. Held it for now. Do you want to see a scan? I replied. Send it to me. Half a minute later, a PDF screenshot arrived. The language was standard legal wording. It simply said that because of internal organizational restructuring, the original contact person would be changed to the newly appointed Director of Strategic Development, Colin Ward, and requested Party A to cooperate by signing a supplemental agreement confirming new contact methods and authorization scope. But at the end of the third paragraph, I saw 4 words. Source code delivery. Those 4 words slid slowly across my nerves like a blunt knife. Vivian had authorized Colin. Colin's company was personally controlled by Vivian. And now, Colin, in his capacity as Lane Tech's Director of Strategic Development, had started requesting source code delivery permissions from clients. If David signed this supplemental agreement, the source code of the Cloud Access system could be legally transferred in full to the company controlled by Colin, without the technical department knowing anything. At that point, legally speaking, Cloud Access would no longer be a technical asset of Lane Tech. It would have completed a full ownership transfer. And every path would be cleanly wrapped inside contracts and official documents. I lifted my head. The night sky showed no stars. Only lights in distant office buildings turned on one by one. Like some silent gaze, I opened my phone notes and created a new file. The title was one word. Chain. Then I began listing items. First, authorization agreement. Provided by Mr. Parker. Scan archived. Second, V-Creation Holdings. Verified by Susan. Colin Ward's company is effectively controlled by Vivian Lane. Third, supplemental letter. Provided by David Chen. Colin Ward requests source code delivery rights in Lane Tech's name. Fourth, differential non-compete agreements. Verified by Jason Powell. Technical department has no restrictive clauses. Fifth, missing link. Prove the authorization agreement has caused substantial damage to the company. After writing those 5 items, I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I put away my phone and walked toward the parking lot. When the car started, I made 2 decisions. First, tomorrow morning, I would go find someone. Second, tomorrow night, I would export every Cloud Access related meeting record, email exchange, and project document from Mr. Parker's backups. Then carefully trace the line that had quietly grown from November 17, 3 years ago from beginning to end. The car drove out of the parking lot and merged into the roaring city traffic. Taillights dragged long red bands through the night. The road ahead was blurred slightly by the high beams of oncoming cars, but I could see the direction clearly. The next morning at 10, I sat in a coffee shop waiting for someone. The coffee shop was hidden in an alley in the old district on the south side. The storefront was small, and the sign had faded under years of sun and rain. But the interior was tasteful. Several oil paintings by little-known local artists hung on the walls. I had known the owner for years. Occasionally, I brought people here to discuss things. She never asked questions. When the door opened, the copper bell hanging from the frame gave a soft ring. The person who entered was Claire Bennett. She wore a dark gray trench coat. Her hair was loosely tied behind her head. Her makeup was light. but her eyes carried a sharpness that was hard to describe. She was Lane Teka's chief legal counsel. She joined 3 years ago. Around the time Vivian had just completed an equity structure adjustment and needed to reorganize all company contracts. Claire handled the vast majority of the company's core legal documents. Of course. That included the authorization agreement. She sat across from me, removed her scarf, folded it neatly onto the chair beside her, and ordered a hot Americano. The entire process had no extra expression. No small talk. No politeness. Straight to the point. Nathan, when you reached out, I knew what you wanted to ask. You knew. Vivian called me. Claire lifted the water glass and took a sip. Yesterday evening. She said you might contact me soon and told me not to say too much. I looked at her and waited. Then I said, Ms. Lane. I'm a lawyer. Claire set down the glass and looked directly into my eyes. Her tone was calm and clear. When she signed that authorization agreement, I was head of legal. In theory, all core company documents should have gone through my review and archive process. But she did not follow that process. That document was signed on November 17, 3 years ago. I only discovered it in early December by accident, when I saw Colin Ward's name appear on an expense reimbursement form from finance. I followed that thread and found out about the agreement. You didn't report it to the board or anyone else. I did. The corner of Claire's mouth moved slightly. A curve so faint it was barely visible. In the name of legal. I sent an internal email to Vivian and copied the CFO at the time, pointing out that the authorization agreement had serious legal risk and suggesting the authorization scope and period be re-evaluated. Then she called me into her office, closed the door, and spoke to me for 40 minutes. What did she say? She said, Attorney Bennett, you're a smart person. Smart people should know when certain documents should appear and when they should disappear. Then she showed me a document. What document? Claire was silent for several seconds. The coffee shop's background music was a soft jazz piece. The copper bell near the counter rang again when someone pushed the door open. But my attention was nailed completely to her. My younger brother's employment contract. She said. He had just graduated the year before and joined a Lane Tech subsidiary. He worked in marketing operations. He had just passed probation. The salary wasn't high, but it was close to home. And my parents were happy with it. Her voice remained calm. But beneath that calm, I could hear something pressed down very tightly. So you didn't continue pursuing it? No. Claire lifted her coffee cup and lowered her gaze to the brown liquid. I chose to shut up. I'm a lawyer. I knew exactly where the legal loopholes were in that authorization agreement. I also knew what would happen to my brother's job if I pushed back. But I didn't come here today to complain. She took a USB drive from the inner pocket of her trench coat, placed it on the table, and pushed it toward me. What's inside are all related files I saved while employed. The original scan of that authorization agreement. Screenshots of the email Vivian sent me at the time. Finance vouchers regarding the first payment record connected to Colin Ward's company. And something I discovered at the end of last year. Vivian used V-Creation Holdings to establish a new technology company whose business scope completely overlaps with Lane Teka's. Its registered address is on the street next to Lane Teka's office building. My fingers landed on the metal casing of the USB drive. Cold. Smooth. Why didn't you bring this out earlier? Because I had no reason. Claire's voice finally shifted slightly. I was paid by the company. My professional ethics told me not to actively do anything that harmed the company's interests. But now you've left. And with your technical ability, you are entirely capable of rebuilding cloud access from the underlying architecture. If you choose to do that, Lane Tech will completely lose its bargaining chip with major clients like David Chen. At that point, the pit Vivian dug will collapse on its own. But giving me these is still leaking company secrets. I'm not giving you company secrets. Claire's expression suddenly became subtle, like a lifelong chess player revealing an extremely restrained smile at the final move. I'm giving you things obtainable through public channels. Every file on the USB drive has its source marked .business registry information, public financial disclosures, court records from public litigation archives. Not a single file is non-public material stolen directly from the company. What about finance's payment records? That came from the publicly disclosed annual report summary of Colin Ward's company. That company sits under an OTC-listed parent. So all significant fund movements have disclosure obligations. I stared at Claire for a long time. She lifted her coffee and took a sip. Her hand was steady, not trembling at all. Why not submit these directly to Lane Tech's board? Because I can't. She set down the cup. My position is still at Lane Tech. I'm giving them to you because you're no longer at Lane Tech. You're an outsider. An outsider with technical ability and the most direct interest in this matter. You're more suitable than I am. The board. There are 5 people on the board. Vivian controls 3 seats. The other 2 are appointed by investors. Those investors hold 23% of Lane Tech. In the past 2 years, they have never voted against any proposal. The reason is simple. Lane Tech's financial statements have looked good every year. And dividends were paid every year. As long as the financials looked good, they barely cared about management's internal operations. So if Cloud Access's value has been hollowed out and the financials can't hold up anymore, they'll start caring. Correct. Claire nodded. But that takes time. What you need to do now is push this matter toward an irreversible climax during that time. She stood, wrapped her scarf around her neck again, picked up the bill, and walked toward the counter. After 2 steps, she looked back and added, "Nathan, one more thing. Colin Ward released an announcement this morning, saying Lane Tech's technical department will complete team restructuring within 2 weeks. He has posted recruitment ads online for senior architecture engineer, with salary set at 50% below market rate. He won't be able to recruit anyone. I know. But his purpose isn't really recruitment." A trace of coldness flashed through Claire's eyes. He is sending a signal externally that Lane Tech's technical team has already been rebuilt and existing business is unaffected. He is trying to stabilize clients who are still hesitating on renewal. Claire left. The copper bell rang again. The door slowly closed under the spring's force, cutting off the noise of the street outside. I sat in place, gripping the USB drive. My fingertip temperature slowly warmed it. Then I took out my phone and sent David Chen a message. "Mr. Chen, can your side prepare a technical evaluation report for me? Just one item. Compare the dependency between the current running version of Cloud Access and its underlying base architecture. I need a specific number explaining how long existing business can function normally if the underlying architecture is separated." 3 minutes later, David replied, 3 days. I can have my technical team prepare an official evaluation report with our company seal. But Nathan, you need to tell me why you need this. I typed. Because you'll soon discover that the foundation under the Cloud Access system you're using has already started cracking. I need a professional third-party evaluation to prove it. The other side was silent for a long time. Then David sent one final message. "Fine. You owe me dinner." I put away my phone, carefully placed the USB drive into my pocket, and walked out of the coffee shop. The sunlight was good. The ginkgo leaves at the alley entrance had turned golden. When the wind blew, they fell in soft rustles, covering the ground like broken gold. I lifted my head and looked at the patch of blue sky cut into fragments by the leaves. I took a deep breath. The first domino had fallen. For the next 3 days, I spent all my time in that temporarily rented office. Calling it an office was generous. It was a shared workspace converted from an old residential building. About 40 square meters. 3 desks against the wall. Several spare desktops Jake had moved from his own home piled in the corner. 12 people could not fit. So everyone took turns coming in. The others worked remotely from home. Mr. Parker was old, and I told him not to run back and forth. But at 8:30 the next morning, he still appeared at the door with his faded backpack on his shoulders. "Mr. Hayes, these old bones can't sit still at home." When he said that, he held a portable hard drive in his hand. The first version backup from 3 years ago was exported from that drive. Jason also sent news. He called Wendy Ross, David Chen's business contact, and carefully guided the conversation. Wendy revealed that last Wednesday, she had indeed received an email from Colin Ward at lanetech.com. The email informed them that the original technical liaison team had changed and requested confirmation of future service procedures. The signature was Colin Ward, Director of Strategic Development. Attached was a so-called technical capability statement, describing LaneTech's new technical team composition in extremely broad language. I asked Wendy to forward me that capability statement. Jason said over the phone. The moment I looked at it, I knew no one from the technical department wrote it. It's full of vague buzzwords, full-stack capability, rich industry experience. Not one sentence says anything concrete. Forward it to me. Already sent to your email. Also, one more thing. Jason lowered his voice. This afternoon, I went to the marketing office to pick up a file. Passing Ms. Lane's office. The door wasn't fully closed. I heard her on a call. She mentioned your name. What did she say? I couldn't hear everything, but I heard one line clearly. She said, "He has no evidence in his hands. Let him make noise. He won't last long." I moved the phone away from my ear and looked at the hang-up button for 2 seconds. Vivian believed I had no evidence. She was confident in Mr. Parker's secrecy. Fair enough. Mr. Parker was an old technical employee near retirement. Usually quiet and reserved. Barely chatting with co-workers. Let alone actively betraying anyone. In her judgment, I was at most an ordinary technical director who had angrily left with his team, holding 14 years of experience. But experience was legally worthless. The one thing she failed to account for was every backup Mr. Parker had made over 3 years. On the evening of the third day, David Chen's technical evaluation report arrived. I opened the PDF. The first page contained a summary statement in bold. After comprehensive evaluation by our technical team, the current business operation layer of the cloud access system has a high degree of coupling with the underlying base architecture. Maintenance and iteration of the underlying code directly determine stability and security of upper-layer business functions. If ownership or control of the underlying architecture is unexpectedly transferred, the current business system, without continuous maintenance, is expected to experience serious performance degradation and security risks within 6 to 12 months, ultimately affecting all downstream business. The second page contained detailed evaluation data and risk factor scoring, with independent analysis reports from 3 subsystems attached. The third page contained the conclusion and signature. David's technical director had signed personally and stamped the company seal. I forwarded the report to Victor Coleman with one line. "Is this enough?" Victor sent a voice message. I tapped it open. His voice carried a trace of expected approval. "Enough. Put Mr. Parker's authorization agreement, Claire's equity information and payment records, and David Chen's technical evaluation report together. That forms a complete evidence chain. The authorization agreement proves Vivian Lane illegally transferred company assets. The equity information and payment records prove the final destination of the transfer path was her personal private company. The technical evaluation report proves the action created substantial risk of damage to LaneTech's core business. And then, who do I give this to? LaneTech's board. But don't hand it directly. Submit it through a formal legal channel. For example, as a shareholder inquiry letter through the 2 directors appointed by investors, formally questioning Vivian Lane. The entire process needs written records. Once it enters formal board inquiry procedure, if Vivian cannot provide a reasonable explanation, it constitutes serious director-level dereliction of duty. But Vivian holds 3 seats. The 2 investor seats together hold 23%. Combined with other minority shareholders' voting rights, they can theoretically block her on certain issues. The key is this: once a formal inquiry letter is issued and the contents are true, those 2 investor-appointed directors must act. If they fail to act and the matter later explodes, they also carry joint liability as directors. I was silent for a while. What about Mr. Parker? Mr. Parker has no legal risk. The authorization agreement was led and signed by Vivian. Mr. Parker, as technical lead at the time, signed under superior instruction. The true responsible party is the legal representative and directors who executed the agreement. At most, Mr. Parker is a witness. I let out a breath. Also, Victor's voice turned serious. Watch Colin Ward's movements these next 2 days. Since he posted recruitment ads, it means he is trying to patch the surface-level hole left by your team's departure. But with his technical level, he can't fill it. If at this stage he does anything stupid such as modifying code without authorization or promising clients functions he cannot deliver, it will become the final straw that breaks Lanetech's back. Do you think he'll do something stupid? Do you think a man like that, after discovering he can't control the position at all, will quietly sit in the office and wait to die? I hung up and sat in the chair of the temporary office. The chair creaked faintly after supporting me for too long. Outside the window, it was raining again. Late autumn rain fell fine and dense, washing the dust accumulated on the glass all day into gray-black streaks. Rainwater dripped from the window ledge one drop at a time. My phone screen lit. It was Jake in the new group. Nathan, I just saw Lanetech's new job postings. Besides senior architect, they added technical vice president. Salary is 80% below market rate. Somehow 3 people actually submitted resumes. I replied. What kind of people? I checked their names. One is a back-end developer laid off from another company last year. His resume says he's proficient in Java, but there's no open source record or project experience anywhere. The other 2 are even worse. One does front-end, the other UI design. Put all 3 together, and they still can't maintain the basics of our team. Several replies followed. Someone sent a crying laughing emoji. Someone wrote, Mr. Ward's move is truly impressive. Another wrote, Nathan, how about I submit a resume and go inside for some internal intel? I replied, no, don't alert them. I put down the phone and looked at the technical evaluation report spread across the desk. My finger moved slowly across the paper. The final line was the signature of David Chen's technical director. Neat and strong, with a date below it. Tomorrow would be the 5th day of the 1-week deadline David gave me. The day after tomorrow, I would go find Lanetech's 2 investor-appointed directors. Time was tightening step by step. The next morning, I went to the hospital. Mr. Parker's wife had been admitted. An old illness. Chronic heart failure. Every year when the weather turned cold, she had to stay in the hospital for a while. Mr. Parker had guarded her all night. Dark circles hung heavily under his eyes. I found him beside the flower bed on the 1st floor of the inpatient building. He sat on a bench smoking. The cigarette in his hand had already burned more than halfway, the ash hanging long enough to fall at any moment. Mr. Parker. He lifted his head. Seeing me, he quickly crushed out the cigarette in the metal ashtray on the bench armrest. Mr. Hayes. Why are you here? Passing by. I placed the thermal container in my hand beside him. My mother made chicken soup. Bring it upstairs for Mrs. Parker. Mr. Parker froze. He reached out and accepted the container, his rough fingers rubbing the edge of the lid twice. His eyes were a little red. Whether from staying up all night or something else, I could not tell. Mr. Hayes. How are things progressing? Soon. I sat beside him. The bench wood was damp from dew. Even through my pants, I could feel the chill. Mr. Parker. Tonight I need to begin organizing all the backups from your hard drive. Every version record, update log, and code comment. I need a full archive. I already exported them. Mr. Parker took another USB drive from his jacket pocket. It was older than the one Claire gave me, with scratches all over the metal shell. This has the full 3-year code repository. 47 versions total, each with detailed change logs and submitter information. Take it. I accepted the USB drive and held it in my palm, feeling the slight coldness of the metal. Mr. Parker. One more thing. After this is over, have you thought about what you want to do next? Mr. Parker was silent for a long time. Downstairs from the inpatient building, someone was walking a golden retriever. The dog sniffed along the muddy edge of the grass, tail wagging slowly. He looked at the dog, his expression as if staring somewhere very far away. After my wife is discharged this time, I want to take her to Florida for a while, he said. She's always said she wants to see the ocean. When we were young, we were busy and had no time. Later, when we had time, we had no money. Now our pension isn't much, but if we save, it should be enough for 2 or 3 months. Then go. I'll cover the cost. Mr. Parker suddenly turned toward me. In his cloudy eyes flashed an emotion I rarely saw on his face: surprise, gratitude, and a kind of helpless embarrassment he could not explain. Mr. Hayes. That won't do. You just left your job. Money must be tight for you too. Mr. Parker. You pressed 3 years and 47 versions of code backups into that hard drive. You endured at Lane Tech for 3 years just so you could hand me that thing today. What you gave me saved me. What I'm giving you is only to let you and your wife live a little better in your later years. I looked into his eyes. This is not a transaction. It's what I should do. Mr. Parker's lips trembled. Then he lowered his head and quickly wiped his eyes with the back of his rough hand. When he lifted his head again, he smiled. It was faint. Not forced. More like someone who had carried something for a long time finally had it taken from his shoulders. And the string pulled too tight across his back finally loosened. Okay, he said. Then I won't be polite with you. After saying goodbye to Mr. Parker, I received a call on the way back to the temporary office. The name on the screen made my footsteps pause. Vivian Lane. I stared at that name for 3 seconds, then answered. Hello. The other side was quiet for 2 seconds. Then Vivian's voice sounded lower than usual, its ending slightly raised, carrying a tone I knew too well from the negotiating table. The deliberately softened voice used to lower someone's guard. Nathan. Let's talk. About what? About what happened after you left. She said. I know you're upset. But some things aren't what you think. I can explain Colin's situation. Then explain. The other end fell quiet again. Then her voice softened further. Like a hand cautiously touching something she was unsure might bite. That authorization agreement was only a technical prearrangement. At the time, the company was negotiating a financing round. The investors required us to separate part of the non-core assets into a subsidiary to reduce valuation risk for the main entity. Colin's company was only an SPV, temporarily holding the underlying code of cloud access. After financing ended, everything would return. Her voice was steady. Every word was spoken with certainty and composure, as if stating an indisputable fact. If it had been me a month ago, I probably would have believed her. But I held 3 things. Mr. Parker's authorization agreement, Claire's equity information and payment records, David Chen's technical evaluation report. Stacked together, those 3 things fit like 3 pieces of a puzzle, making every word she had just said impossible to stand on. When does the financing end? I asked. Within half a year. Then why is Colin Ward now using his identity as Lane Tech's Director of Strategic Development to request source code delivery permissions from clients? The other end went silent for an instant. A very brief instant. But that hesitation was enough for me to confirm what I had been thinking. She did not know I had already obtained this much. That is a normal operation under internal process adjustment. Her voice remained steady. But that deliberately softened tone had disappeared, replaced by something colder and harder. Nathan. I know you must have many misunderstandings about me and Colin right now. But if you're willing to come back, the technical director position is still yours. I can give you equity. Real equity written into the corporate registry. 5%. When she offered that, her tone carried a precise, calculated generosity. 5%. It sounded like a lot. But I knew what 5% of Lane Tech represented in dividends and voting rights. It was a generous-looking number that affected almost nothing at the decision-making level. And she specifically emphasized written into the corporate registry. Because she knew very clearly that for 14 years, my name had never truly appeared on the shareholder registry. She was using the thing I had wanted for 14 years but never received to exchange for my silence. Vivian Lane. I called her full name. In the phone call, the full name sounded especially stiff and distant. What were you thinking on the night of our wedding anniversary when you signed that agreement? The other end went completely quiet. 5 seconds of blank silence. Like the dead stillness before a string stretched to the limit snaps. Then she hung up. I stood by the roadside, holding the phone. Late autumn wind rolled fallen leaves across my feet. The call ended, screen automatically returned to the home page. The wallpaper was an icon I had set many years ago. A deep blue sea. I placed the phone back into my pocket and kept walking. The negotiation window, in that call, had just been closed by my own hand. And I did not regret closing it at all. Day 6. I stood across the street from Lane Tech's building and looked up at the 27-story glass curtain wall. Sunlight slanted in from the east and refracted into dazzling patches of light. The building was still that same building. The glass was still that same glass. Even the outline of someone passing behind a certain window on the 27th floor felt familiar. But the person standing here was no longer the me from a month ago. I crossed the street and entered the lobby. The receptionist was new. Long hair. The cautious, nervous expression of an intern still on her face. When she saw me approach, she stood, fingers twisting together nervously. "Hello, sir. Who are you here to see?" "The two directors appointed by Lane Tech's investors." I said. "I have an appointment." She said. "Please wait a moment." Then lowered her head to check the appointment system. I did not actually have an appointment. But I knew those two directors were here today for the quarterly operating analysis meeting. I got that information from Jason. After checking for a while, the receptionist lifted her head, her face troubled. "Sir, there's no appointment record in the system. May I ask which company you're from?" "Tell Ms. Lane a former technical department colleague is here to speak with the two directors about a technical asset transfer issue. She'll let me in." The receptionist hesitated, then picked up the phone and called an extension. Half a minute later, she hung up. The expression on her face changed, like a cat whose tail had suddenly been stepped on. Her whole body tightened. "Ms. Lane says you may go up. 27th floor. First room on the left." The elevator rose. The numbers in the cabin jumped one by one. 26. 27. Ding. The doors slowly opened. The hallway was still the same hallway. The polished marble floor had been mopped spotless by the cleaning staff, reflecting the shadows of the downlights in the ceiling. On the wall hung several photos from the company's early days. The ribbon cutting when we moved into this building in year 5. A dozen people stood downstairs, laughing wildly. In the photo, I stood on Vivian's right, wearing an ugly yellow-brown jacket. My hair was thicker back then, and my face looked smoother. I withdrew my gaze, turned left, and pushed open the first conference room door. 3 people were inside. Vivian sat in the center. She wore a deep black business suit today, with a silver brooch at the collar. Her makeup was flawless. Her lip color was a restrained shade between brick red and muted rose. When her gaze landed on me, her pupils contracted slightly. But very quickly, she recovered that familiar calmness of someone who controlled everything. On her left sat 2 middle-aged men. The one on the left was bald, wearing gold-rimmed glasses, his whole body thin like a stretched bamboo pole. The one on the right was slightly heavier, his hair slicked back, a gold Rolex dial gleaming under the lights. I recognized them. The one on the left was Warren Walsh, the director appointed by Dairy Capital. The one on the right was Robert Lowe from Huatong Investments. Together, they represented 23% of Lane Tech's equity. "Nathan Hayes." Vivian spoke first. Her voice carried no warmth. "In what capacity are you attending our board meeting?" "As a whistleblower." I took a document pouch from my briefcase and placed it on the table. Inside were 3 things. The scan of Mr. Parker's authorization agreement, the equity information and payment records extracted from Claire's USB drive, David Chen's company's technical evaluation report. I had gone to a print shop that morning and printed all of them in triplicate, each placed in a transparent folder. "I suggest the 3 of you read what's inside first." Vivian's gaze landed on the 3 folders. Her finger moved lightly against the tabletop, but she did not pick one up. Warren and Robert exchanged a glance. Then Warren reached out first and took a copy. The rustle of page-turning sounded in the quiet conference room. Robert followed and took another copy. The 2 lowered their heads and turned the pages one by one. The expressions on their faces shifted from confusion to concentration. Then from concentration to a gravity they could not quite conceal. I saw Robert's finger pause when he reached the 3rd page. He lifted his head and looked at Vivian once. That look contained something complex. Vivian still did not reach for the documents. She sat there with her back straight, both hands folded on the table, nails trimmed neatly. Her expression did not change from beginning to end, but her lips were pressed a little thinner than usual. Warren finished reading first. He closed the folder, placed it on the table, removed his gold-rimmed glasses, wiped them with a cloth, then put them back on. He looked at Vivian. When he spoke, His tone was careful and strictly businesslike. Ms. Lane. This authorization agreement. As a director, I was never informed of it. It was an internal operational decision. Vivian said steadily. There was no need to report every item to the board. But the technical asset involved here is worth more than $30 million. Robert spoke now. More directly than Warren. With the displeasure of someone whose rights had been violated. A $30 million asset transfer requires majority board approval under the company charter. When the agreement was signed, Cloud Access had not fully completed commercial validation. At the time, it was only an internal technical platform and had not yet generated direct large-scale commercial revenue. From the company's financial perspective, its book value was not high. Ms. Lane. Robert tapped the folder cover with his finger. The content of this agreement is permanent authorization and irrevocable, and the authorization fee is $0. Even if Cloud Access did not have high book value at the time, it represented the company's future core technical competitiveness. You gave away the foundation. You know better than I do how many years this building can still stand. The air in the room suddenly chilled. Vivian remained seated, back straight. But the posture of her hands on the table changed. Her fingers, originally laid calmly over one another, began to interlock tightly, the knuckles faintly whitening. I stood on the other side of the conference table. I had not sat down from the moment I entered. I stood there like a wedge nailed into the floor. There's one more thing. I took the final document from my bag and placed it on the table. It was David Chen's technical evaluation report. I pushed it toward Warren and Robert. This is a third-party professional evaluation report for the current Cloud Access system. The conclusion is that if control over the underlying architecture is transferred, existing business will experience irreversible performance degradation and security risk within 6 to 12 months. At that time, LaneTech's core client base will face large-scale loss. Warren turned to the final page and saw the official seal and signature. His brows tightened. Ms. Lane. His voice became low and grave. I need an explanation. The entire conference room sank into silence. Long. Heavy. Like a stone slowly falling to the bottom of water. Vivian sat there. Her gaze passed over Warren and Robert, finally landing on my face. There was something in that gaze I had never seen before. Not the high and mighty controller, but a person who had suddenly discovered she was surrounded on the chessboard, rapidly calculating how many exits remained. Nathan. She called my name. Her voice was pressed low, carrying a barely audible hoarseness. Do you think you've won? I don't think anyone has won. I said. I only put on this table what should have been seen 3 years ago. Then I turned and walked to the conference room door. When my hand held the handle, I looked back at her one last time. She was still seated in the center of those 3 board seats, back straight as a bamboo stem that refused to bend. But I saw her fingers tremble lightly against the table. The trembling was so slight that if my angle had not been just right, I would not have noticed it. I pulled open the door and walked out. My footsteps echoed through the hallway. This time, no one chased after me. 2 days later, Victor Coleman called me. LaneTech's board has exploded internally. His voice carried a rare excitement. Warren Walsh and Robert Lowe jointly submitted an emergency inquiry letter, demanding Vivian Lane provide a written explanation within 1 week regarding every detail of the Cloud Access authorization agreement, and submit all related party transaction contracts and cash flow records. If she can't give a reasonable explanation, the 2 directors will jointly report to regulators. What's Vivian's reaction? She sent an internal email with very strong wording, saying every transaction was legal and compliant, and asking the board not to be influenced by emotional accusations from former employees outside the company. But according to what I heard, she has already ordered finance to work overtime organizing related documents. That means she's panicking. What about Colin? He's still sitting in that position. But rumors are already coming from inside LaneTech. The new Mr. Ward held a technical team meeting last week, and he was the only person in the room. He tried to give the few candidates who submitted resumes an online test. In the end, he got stuck on a basic algorithm question himself. On the call, he stammered for 5 minutes and finally said, "This question isn't clear enough. Let's use another assessment method." I laughed once. A very light laugh. What happens next? Next depends on Warren and Robert's attitude. If the documents Vivian provides can't explain things clearly, they can directly submit the report to regulators. Once the investigation process begins, Vivian, as the actual controller, will face serious legal risk. And Mr. Parker, let him relax. His witness status has already been officially recorded by Warren's side. He is a key witness, not a person involved. After hanging up, I stood before the temporary office window. The sky had been cloudy for several days, but now it finally cleared. A beam of sunlight slipped through the clouds and landed on the windowsill, illuminating dust clearly. My phone rang again. This time it was Susan. "Nathan, I just got news." Her voice carried urgency she could barely suppress. "Colin Ward's company, the one whose equity you asked me to check, released an announcement this afternoon. It says they have completed full technical reception of Cloud Access's underlying architecture." The announcement directly mentions David Chen's company, saying, "Technical integration confirmation has been completed with core clients." My heartbeat stopped for a beat. Where was the announcement posted? Their company website and an industry news platform. I took screenshots. Send them. 3 seconds later, a screenshot appeared on my phone. The announcement was extremely official. Standard PR language. It basically said the company had smoothly taken over the underlying technical architecture of Lane Tech's Cloud Access system, had completed technical integration work with core clients, and would continue providing high-quality iteration services. In the second paragraph, it explicitly mentioned, "Major clients represented by Mr. David Chen have confirmed the new cooperation framework." But I knew David had not confirmed any framework. He had only received Colin's supplemental letter and held it unsigned. Colin was fabricating facts. He was inventing a confirmed client relationship, trying to create a fait accompli through public announcement. If this announcement spread through the industry, other potential clients would believe the transfer of Cloud Access had completed all procedures and that Lane Tech's old technical team had been fully replaced. Then, even if David ultimately refused renewal, Colin could say, that was David Chen's personal choice. We had already completed the transfer work. He was building momentum, fabricating victory. I forwarded the screenshot to David with one line. "Mr. Chen, did you see this?" 3 minutes later, David called. His voice was 2 pitches higher than usual, carrying anger at being used. "Nathan, what does this announcement mean? When did I ever confirm any cooperation framework? I didn't even sign that supplemental letter." "He's betting you won't publicly deny it," I said. "Because public denial means tearing your relationship with Lane Tech apart, which will affect your industry connections and business interests. He's betting you won't dare." He bet wrong. David's voice was decisive. "I'll issue a public statement right now clarifying that I have not confirmed any new cooperation framework with Colin Ward or his affiliated companies. At the same time, I will announce that the Cloud Access renewal contract is suspending all procedures until Lane Tech's internal technical architecture ownership issue is fully clarified." "Mr. Chen, doing that means standing directly opposite Lane Tech." "I stand with what is right, not with a company," David said. "Nathan, do you remember what I told you on that call? With technology, we recognize people. If you're no longer at Lane Tech, then Lane Tech's technology has been discounted." He used my name in that announcement to build momentum. That is using my reputation as endorsement. I won't tolerate it. The call ended. 10 minutes later, David Chen's company website updated with a brief statement. The wording was official but clear. The core sentence was, "Our company has never reached any form of cooperation confirmation with Mr. Colin Ward or his affiliated companies regarding the technical transfer of the Cloud Access system. The original technical service contract process has been suspended pending further clarification." This statement was screenshotted and reposted by several industry media outlets. Within an hour, it spread through multiple executive groups across the entire tech park. The second domino fell without me doing anything. That evening, Mr. Parker called. "Mr. Hayes, have you checked online?" "Checked what?" "Lane Tech's official website posted an announcement." Mr. Parker's voice was tight, like a fully drawn string. "Go look." I opened Lane Tech's website. The latest announcement hung in the most eye-catching position on the homepage. Title: Announcement regarding internal technical management process adjustment. The announcement was not long, but every word felt like a nail hammered into the screen. In light of recent adjustments to the company's internal technical team structure and to ensure the stable operation of core business, the company has decided to reevaluate the ownership and management model of the underlying architecture of the cloud access system, following board inquiry and preliminary review. The relevant technical authorization agreement contains procedural deficiencies, and an internal compliance review process has been initiated. Until the review is completed, all cloud access-related business decisions will be temporarily placed under direct board supervision. The authority scope of former Director of Strategic Development Colin Ward will be temporarily narrowed to routine administrative management matters. I stared at the final line 3 times. The authority scope of former Director of Strategic Development Colin Ward will be temporarily narrowed to routine administrative management matters. Colin had been sidelined 24 hours earlier. He had still been the brightest new star at the top of Lane Tech's power pyramid. Now he was pinned to a meaningless placeholder called routine administrative management. From a core executive controlling strategic resource allocation, he had become a piece of waste paper sitting in an office sending and receiving emails. I scrolled down and saw the signature at the end. Board of Directors. Lane Technologies Inc. Specific directors were not listed, but I knew what it meant. Warren and Robert's attitude had become clear enough that Vivian had been forced to make concessions. If she refused the wording of this announcement, the 2 investor-appointed directors would initiate a formal no-confidence motion in the next board meeting. Mr. Parker exhaled heavily over the phone, like a breath of stale air that had been stuck for too long finally leaving his chest. Mr. Hayes, did you see that Colin Ward? He's finished. Not yet, I said. This is only the beginning. The real core problem is Vivian. Colin is just a puppet pushed to the front. As long as Vivian still controls 3 board seats, there are variables. Mr. Parker was silent for a few seconds. Then what do you plan to do? Wait for her next move. When someone is pushed into a corner, they choose one of 2 things: admit defeat, or make one last strike. What do you think she'll choose? I looked out at the gradually darkening sky. Office buildings in the distance lit up one by one, like white stones placed onto a chessboard. She'll come to me, I said. Sure enough. On the 3rd night, Vivian came in person. When she came to find me, I was sitting by the window in the temporary office, drinking water. The sky had gone completely dark. The streetlights downstairs cast orange circles into the cold wind, and a few tiny flying insects hovered around their edges. When the door opened, I thought Jake had returned. I glanced over. Then the cup in my hand paused for half a second. Vivian wore the deep black business suit, covered by a long coat. Her hair fell over her shoulders. Compared to her usual perfectly arranged precision, she looked more rushed, more disordered. Her complexion was not good. The dark circles under her eyes could not quite be covered by makeup. The lipstick on her lips was also paler than usual. She stood at the door, looking at me, not entering. Can we talk? I placed the cup on the table, leaned back in my chair, and nodded. She entered and sat in the chair opposite me. It was a second-hand chair we bought from a used market. The cushion had collapsed slightly, and when she sat her body tilted a little before she quickly adjusted her posture. She looked around the office. Her gaze passed over the 3 desks, the desktop towers piled in the corner, and several hand-drawn technical architecture sketches temporarily taped to the wall. The expression on her face was complicated. I could not clearly tell what it was. You're living in a place like this. It's only temporary office space. She was silent for a while. Then she took a folder from her bag and placed it on the table. I saw the Lane Tech logo printed on the cover. I'm already handling the board situation. Her voice was much more restrained than the last phone call. It no longer carried that deliberately softened negotiating tone, nor that cold tone of control. There was something in it I had rarely heard from her. Fatigue. Or perhaps the beginning of compromise. How do you plan to handle it? I can invalidate the authorization agreement. The underlying architecture of cloud access will return to Lane Tech as main entity. All legal documents related to Colin's company will be cancelled. If your team is willing, you can come back. The technical department gets independent budget authority. 15% equity. Written into the corporate registry. Irrevocable. She spoke slowly. Every promise was clearly delivered from her mouth. I could tell she had thought these things through before coming. Perhaps she had even communicated preliminary terms with Warren and Robert. But looking at her, I suddenly felt she was very unfamiliar. Wind squeezed through the window gap, and the chill crawled along the back of my neck into my spine. Vivian Lane. I called her name. This time my voice contained no emotion. Only the calm of someone who had already finished the entire book and was closing the final page. Do you think every day I've sat in this office? I've been waiting for these conditions from you. Her lips moved. No sound came out. Every day I've sat here. I've been thinking about the night of November 17th 3 years ago. I spoke slowly. I cooked the dishes you liked at home and waited 4 hours. The food got cold and hot. Hot and cold. When you came back, you said you were tired and went to shower. You didn't even see the cake. Nathan. When you signed that agreement, you weren't thinking of me. You were thinking of Colin. Or maybe you weren't thinking of anyone at all. You were only thinking about how to move things somewhere you could fully control. It doesn't matter anymore. It really doesn't. I opened the drawer and took the document pouch out again. I placed it on the table, opened it, and spread the 3 documents one by one. The authorization agreement scan. The equity information and payment records. The technical evaluation report. I've already handed these to Lane Tech's board. Warren and Robert each have a complete copy. I also made 3 backups and stored them in 3 different places. Even if you take the documents here tonight, it won't help. Vivian's gaze landed on those pages. She looked at them for a long time. Then she lifted her head and looked into my eyes. Her eyes were faintly red, but her expression still held a stubborn calm that refused to collapse. Why do this? Her voice dropped. It was a low tone rarely heard from her. Almost a kind of weakness. 14 years. Nathan. We were together 14 years. Do you hate me enough to send me in? I don't hate you. My voice was very soft. I just don't trust you anymore. Trust isn't like an authorization agreement. There's no such thing as permanently valid and irrevocable. You spent 3 years using it up little by little. The office was quiet for a long time. The heating vent made a faint hum, like a moth struggling inside a machine. Vivian stood. Her body swayed once, then stabilized. She placed the folder back into her bag and zipped it slowly, like someone packing the last of her luggage. At the door, she stopped without turning around. Nathan. That cake. What flavor was it? I was silent for a moment. Tiramisu. From the shop you used to love. It closed later. I reserved the final batch 3 days in advance. She said nothing else. She pushed open the door and walked out. Her footsteps faded down the hallway and disappeared toward the stairwell. I sat where I was. The pages in front of me were still spread open, their edges lifting slightly in the wind leaking through the window. Outside, the streetlight cast her shadow onto the ground. It soon vanished. I lowered my head and looked at the final page of the authorization agreement scan. I knew Vivian's signature well. When she wrote the final stroke of Lane, she always dragged a tiny upward tail. Looking at that tail now, it seemed like a rushed period that had not been taken back in time. I slowly gathered the pages and placed them back into the document pouch. Then I picked up my phone and sent Warren Walsh a message. Director Walsh. Vivian Lane came to see me just now. She proposed several solutions. My position is that this matter must complete the full compliance review process and cannot be privately settled in any form. All documents, contracts, and fund movements must be disclosed to all shareholders. Warren replied quickly. Only 2 words. Received. The third word was silence. 1 week later, Lane Tech held a full shareholder meeting. The meeting was chaired by Warren Walsh. The hall was in the conference center on the 3rd floor of Lane Tech's building, able to hold 200 people. About 60 plus attended today. All investor representatives, company middle managers and above, and several minority shareholder representatives. I sat in the last row against the wall. Mr. Parker sat beside me, both hands on his knees, fingers gently rubbing the fabric of his pants. 3 people sat on stage. Warren in the center, Robert on the right, Vivian on the left. The first agenda item was Internal Compliance Review Report regarding the Cloud Access Underlying Architecture Authorization Agreement. Warren read the review conclusion. There was no ambiguity in it. The authorization agreement had violated the procedural requirements in the company charter regarding disposal of major assets. It had not gone through board review. It had not undergone independent third-party valuation. The authorization fee seriously deviated from fair market value. It was an invalid authorization. Therefore, Warren set down the report and swept his gaze across the hall. The board unanimously resolves that this authorization agreement does not possess legal validity. Lane Tech will formally issue a termination notice to the contracting party, requiring immediate cessation of all commercial activities based on this agreement. At the same time, relevant responsible parties involved in this agreement will be submitted to the company's internal compliance department for further investigation and handling. His gaze did not fall on Vivian, but everyone in the room looked at her. Vivian sat there, back still straight. Her lipstick was darker than the last time I saw her, as if she had deliberately tried to improve her complexion. But beneath the table, where no one could see, her fingers tightened slightly. The meeting continued for more than 2 hours. It discussed financial adjustments, business restructuring, new team architecture, and many other issues. I sat in the last row and did not participate in any discussion. Only when asked did I answer a few simple questions about the cloud access technical architecture as the former head of the technical department. Near the end, Mr. Parker gently tugged my sleeve. "Mr. Hayes, check your phone." I looked down. Jake had sent a screenshot in the new group. It was the latest announcement on Lane Tech's website. Title: Announcement regarding management personnel adjustment. The content was short, but when I reached the third line, my finger stopped on the screen. Upon board review and approval, effective immediately, Ms. Vivian Lane will no longer serve as Chief Executive Officer and legal representative of the company. Related duties will be temporarily assumed by the board. Ms. Vivian Lane will transition to strategic advisor and will no longer participate in daily operations and management. Low discussions began spreading through the room. I heard people in the rows ahead whispering. Some voices carried surprise. Some carried hidden joy. Some carried the relief of finally seeing an ending. The buzzing sound in the room spread like a tide. Mr. Parker's hands tightened on his knees, then slowly loosened. His shoulders relaxed. Like a beam held tense for 3 years had finally been lowered steadily to the ground. I looked up at the stage. Vivian was still seated there. Her back was perfectly straight, but her lips finally trembled in a way almost impossible to see. Her gaze passed over most of the room, over rows of heads, over all the shareholders and colleagues whispering. It landed on me in the last row. I looked back at her without expression. Then she lowered her eyes, looked down at the unfinished meeting materials in front of her, and turned to the next page. After the meeting, people gradually dispersed. Mr. Parker stood and moved his stiff legs, then patted my shoulder. "Mr. Hayes, I'm going to buy something good tonight and make my wife a proper meal." The smile on his face was the most relaxed I had seen in the 10 years I had known him. When I walked out of the conference center, I ran into Colin Ward at the hallway corner. He leaned against the fire door, wearing a navy suit. His tie was half loosened. His hair was slightly messy. He looked completely different from the man in the conference room 2 weeks ago with that carefully rehearsed smile. When he saw me, his body instinctively shrank back. Then he forced himself upright. "Nathan Hayes." I stopped and looked at him. His lips moved. He squeezed out something that was supposed to be a smile but failed. Like a stray dog kicked once while still pretending nothing happened. "I saw the announcement," he said, voice dry. "My position. The company says it needs to be re-evaluated later. Are you satisfied now?" His voice suddenly gained a sharp edge, like a thorn piercing through layers of wrapping. "You pulled Vivian down from that position. You destroyed me too. You won. Are you satisfied?" I looked at his face and suddenly felt tired. Not the exhaustion after victory. The calm exhaustion of someone who had finally reached a destination after a long walk, only to realize the destination itself was not as dazzling as imagined. "Colin Ward," I said, 3 years ago, when you received that authorization agreement, did you know what it was?" His gaze flickered. "You knew," I said. Of course you knew. You were the legal representative of that company. When Vivian Lane sent you code worth tens of millions at almost no cost. You signed. You never said once, "This isn't appropriate." You took that thing, waited 3 years, and then tried to take over an entire technical system in the clumsiest way possible. You don't even know how to use Git. His face flushed red. His lips trembled. He wanted to say something. But in the end, only an indistinct breath escaped. "I'm not telling you this to humiliate you." I turned toward the hallway exit, my voice gradually growing distant with my steps. "I only want you to know that it will take you a very long time to understand one simple truth. Something that doesn't belong to you will only burn your hand when you hold it." I pushed open the glass door at the end of the hallway. Sunlight rushed in. The late autumn afternoon sky was a pale blue washed clean by wind. Leaves covered the street. Not far away, someone pushed a sweet potato cart, and the air carried a soft caramelized sweetness. I stood on the steps outside the building. Behind me, the 27-story office tower stood silently. The glass curtain wall reflected blue sky and white clouds like a giant mirror, swallowing every story that had once happened inside. My phone vibrated. David Chen sent a message. "Nathan, the board called me this afternoon. They said the technical handover process for Cloud Access has entered formal liquidation, and future matters will be renegotiated by new management." When I took the call, the person on the other end asked me one question: "Who do you want leading future technical service?" I said, "Your name." Below it, another sentence: "Are you ready?" I stood in the late autumn sunlight and looked at that message. Then I lifted my head, my gaze passing over the top of that building, toward the farther skyline. The city's outline under the blue sky was clear and firm. Those dense buildings looked like a growing forest. Inside every building, countless stories were ongoing, unfolding, and beginning. I placed the phone back into my pocket, turned, and walked down the street. Wind blew from behind, lifting the hem of my jacket slightly. Ginkgo leaves by the road were swept into the air, spinning several times before slowly landing on my shoulder. I reached up, took the leaf, and looked at it. Its veins were clear. Its edges had curled and yellowed, but it remained whole. I placed it into my jacket pocket and kept walking. 14 years. A marriage. A company. A 12-person team. An agreement hidden for 3 years. A person who turned away during the best years. All of that had passed. The road ahead was still long, but I was not alone. Final chapter. 3 months later, CloudForge Technologies moved into a new building in the east section of the tech park. 6 floors. Not large, but the lighting was excellent. Mr. Parker chose the workstation by the window. Every morning, he arrived earliest, pushed open the window for air, then used the old rag he had kept for 7 or 8 years to wipe the desk. The team was still 12 people. Not one was missing. Jason Powell later resigned from Lane Tech too, bringing 7 or 8 core client resources with him to join us. David Chen's company became our first official signed client. The contract was for 3 years, and the amount was 20% higher than the one he had signed at Lane Tech. That afternoon, I was sorting documents in the office and found the craft paper envelope at the bottom of a drawer. The one Mr. Parker had given me. The authorization agreement. When I opened it, the pages had yellowed slightly, and the edges showed tiny cracks from being folded repeatedly. I looked at those pages for a long time. I remembered every line clearly. November 17th, 3 years ago. Irrevocable authorization. V-Creation Holdings. Colin Ward. Each name and date had once stabbed into my nerves like nails. Now, seeing them again, the sharp pain had dulled into a faint mark worn smooth by time. I folded the pages again, placed them back into the envelope, and pulled open the drawer. I placed it at the innermost layer. Beside it was the ginkgo leaf I had brought back from the entrance of Lane Tech's building. The leaf had dried completely. Its color had turned deep brown. The raised veins looked like a miniature map. Mr. Parker knocked on my office door. "Mr. Hayes." Mr. Chen called. "He wants a technical handover meeting this afternoon and asked who we're sending." "Send Jake. His technical ability is already enough to handle clients independently." Mr. Parker nodded. Then added, "One more thing. There's a package for you downstairs in the locker." Fairly large. No sender name. I went downstairs to get it. The cardboard box was not large, but it had weight in my hands. The tape sealed it tightly. I returned to the office and opened it. Inside was a thermal container. I froze. Then slowly opened the lid. A familiar scent drifted out. Tiramisu. The top was covered with a thin layer of cocoa powder. The edges were cut very neatly. A small heart shape had been pressed into the center with a mold. Beside the container was a note. White paper. No header. No signature. Only 2 lines. I studied for a long time. From now on, no one will miss the taste of that shop again. There was no name. But the final stroke of Vivian had that slightly upward tail. I read the note twice. Then folded it and placed it back into the container. I did not take a single bite of the tiramisu. I closed the lid again and placed it in the small refrigerator in the corner of the office. That night, the team had dinner together at a newly opened barbecue restaurant. 12 people sat around one large round table. Beer bottles clinked. The cumin scent of grilled skewers mixed with charcoal heat and rose upward. Jake drank too much and insisted on toasting me with a bottle. Nathan, when does our new product launch? End of next month. Mr. Parker sat in the corner, slowly eating a skewer of grilled chives with a rare relaxed look on his face. His wife had returned from Florida last month. She said it was so warm there she almost did not want to leave. He had saved 3 months of vacation and planned to take her again next spring. When dinner ended late at night, I stood on the steps outside the barbecue restaurant and watched everyone leave in 2s and 3s by taxi. The streetlights stretched each person's shadow long across the ground, overlapping and separating. Jake was the last to get into a car. He leaned his head out the window and shouted, "See you tomorrow, Nathan." Then the car turned the corner and its taillights disappeared into the night. I stood for a while and looked up at the sky. Tonight's sky was unexpectedly clear. There were a few stars. Not many. But each one was bright. The wind blew from the north, carrying the clean, sharp chill of early winter. I pulled my scarf higher, took out my phone, and scrolled through my contacts. I found a name. Claire Bennett. She had resigned from Lane Tech last month too and joined a new law firm. I saw she had recently posted an update. The picture showed the view outside her new office window. Below it, one line. Start over. I liked the post. Then locked the screen. Behind me came the sound of the barbecue shop owner closing up. The metal shutter rolled down with a rattling sound, followed by the light clink of keys. I took one last look at the office tower at the end of the street. 27 floors. The glass curtain wall reflected the lights of the buildings across from it. Specks of brightness like shattered light. Then I turned and walked toward the parking lot. My shoes stepped over fallen leaves, making soft, fine rustling sounds. Rhythmic. Unhurried. Like the city's most ordinary breath late at night. When the car started, I adjusted the rearview mirror and saw my own face. Thinner than 3 months ago. But my spirit was good. There were 2 new lines at the corners of my eyes. Left behind by all those nights spent organizing the code repository. I drove out of the parking lot and merged into the empty late-night street. The navigation showed 10 minutes to home. The route passed through an old district where late-night food stalls were still lit, and several people hunched their shoulders while waiting for fried noodles. The radio played an old song from a band I used to listen to in college. The melody started, and my fingers unconsciously tapped the steering wheel twice in rhythm. My phone lay on the passenger seat. The screen stayed quietly dark. No more inquiry letters. No more accusatory messages. No more cold texts at 3 in the morning with only 10 words. Everything had settled. The road ahead was green. I pressed the gas, and the car moved forward smoothly. In the rearview mirror, the road behind kept retreating, shrinking, disappearing, like a timeline being folded away. I turned the car music up one notch and relaxed back into the seat. Night wind poured in through the half-open window, carrying the scent of grass and damp earth from the edge of the city. Everything was over. And everything had just begun. There was a road ahead. There were lights on the road. Under the lights, there were shadows. Inside the shadows, there was me. The car drove farther and farther away, merging into the flowing lights deep inside the city. The lights brightened and dimmed, like the pulse of time. Steady. Clear. Endless. Alright. That's all for today's story. Please remember to subscribe and leave a comment.